Part 50. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 492. Chapter 490 of the Ruyi Young Man. Chapter 490, Betrayal. Tang Huai walked into the room and looked at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man stood up from his seat, dusted off his sleeves, looked at Tang Huai, and asked, "How long will Mr. Tang prepare to lock Su?" Tang Huai sat opposite him, poured him a cup of tea, and asked, "Mr. Su is staying well in the capital, why do you want to leave the capital?" The middle-aged man said calmly, "My mother is ill, so Su will naturally go home to visit her." Mr. Su's mother died of illness 3 years ago. Tang Huai looked at him and said, "This reason can fool King Kong, but not me." He took a sip of tea and said, "Over the years, our Tang family, and even His Royal Highness Prince Duan, have suffered a lot from Mr. Su. Mr. Su suddenly left the capital, and I fell asleep. I'm not sure, so I have to invite you back and ask for details." He looked at the middle-aged man and asked, "Isn't it Mr. Su's behind this incident?" Mr. Su raised his eyebrows and asked, "What's the matter?" Tang Huai put down his teacup and said, "Mr. Su no longer needs to pretend in front of me. Apart from you, who else around King Kong can do it and wipe out all the power of the Tang family and King Duan?" Mr. Su glanced at him and said, "I left Beijing this time and did not intend to come back. I don't know what Prince Kong will do. Mr. Tang is really unnecessary." "Don't plan to come back." Tang Huai looked at him and asked, "You have assisted King Kong for so long, and you have given him so many ingenious ideas. Once King Kong succeeds in ascending the throne, you will be the minister who has made the greatest contribution to the dragon. You will easily give it all up. It is precisely because I have done so much for King Kong that I have to leave as soon as possible." Mr. Su looked at him calmly and said, "Otherwise, when King Kong loses, wouldn't he be buried with him?" King Kong was defeated. Tang Huai was startled when he heard this. The expression on his face was no longer indifferent, and he said in surprise, "You actually gave up on Prince Kong?" "King Duan, the representative of the Tang family, has fought with King Kong for so long and knows King Kong and his camp very well. King Kong is a complete idiot, but behind him are many dignitaries in the capital, and they are also closely connected with generals who are beyond the reach of the Tang family. Of course, the Tang family has a deep foundation in the court. Even so, in the battle in the court, King Kong was still no match for King Duan. King Kong is what he is today, all thanks to the powerful advisors around him. This Mr. Su is the most feared person in the Tang family. If not for him, King Kong would have been eliminated in the battle for the right to inherit the throne a few years ago. Out. Over the years, the Tang family has suffered many losses at the hands of this person. What made him unbelievable was that this Mr. Su had actually given up on Prince Kong. It felt like the Tang family had gathered enough strength to give their opponent a heavy blow. Before his fist could be swung out, suddenly something happened in the sky. A meteorite fell and killed their opponent. This kind of pie-in-the-sky thing made him suspicious. Mr. Su did not shy away from this at all, nodding and saying, "Kong Wang is like a piece of rotten wood that cannot be carved. It is only his fault that he made a mistake in the first place. Fortunately, it is not too late to stop now. Those who know the current affairs are heroes. It is a good thing that Mr. Su can cut off a strong man's arm." Tang Huai looked at him and said, "If Mr. Su can switch to the sect of His Highness Duan Wang, I guarantee that all our past grievances will be eliminated. Let bygones be bygones. When His Royal Highness Duan Wang succeeds to the throne, we can give you whatever Mr. Su wants." Mr. Su looked at him and asked, "So, Mr. Tang still doesn't intend to let Su go?" Tang Huai said, "Mr. Su is a truly capable person. When he chose King Kong, he also wanted to become a minister of Kong Long. As long as you say a word, all the grievances between us will be wiped out. Your status with King Duan will definitely not be the same lower than King Kong. Does Mr. Su really no longer consider it?" Mr. Su looked at him and asked, Does Su have a choice? Tang Hui smiled and said, no. In Prince Kang's palace, Prince Kang was pacing in the palace, with a look of joy that could not be concealed on his face. He took a piece of paper and looked at it. This was just reported from Dali Temple. Among the 15 people arrested today, 11 have been convicted and it is impossible to stand up again. On the other list in his hand, dozens of people were listed, all of whom were names that appeared on the Lu family's gift list. This is just the beginning. Prince Kang held the piece of paper tightly and said, Zhao Ming, don't you want to be the emperor? I will help you, but I will make you a loner this time. He looked back and said, I have an idea. Tang Grenzai can publish a newspaper, why can't we? As long as we post the names of these people, let the people in the whole city know, so many pairs of eyes are watching, in full view of the public and public opinion, even if my father doesn't punish them, it won't work. Xiao Anbo looked at him and said, Your Highness, the Tang family's newspapers sell for a penny each, and the paper money is not enough. Our price is higher than theirs, and no one buys it. If we are like them, we will lose money. Stupid, King Kong glared at him and said, short-sighted, is now the time to be stingy. Xiao Anbo said, but your highness, even if you are not stingy with money, the Tang family's newspapers go through the imperial court. If Tang Ning can do the same thing, why can't I? The king, Prince Kong interrupted him with a wave of his hand, and said, I will leave this matter to you. Oops. Xiao Anbo's expression changed, and he suddenly said, my subordinate has a stomachache. Let's go to the toilet first. After saying that, he ran out quickly. King Kong frowned, pointed at the other people, and said, this matter will be left to you. I will give you money, and you will go to all the major bookstores in Beijing. Go and ask them to publish newspapers. I don't believe it. So many bookstores combined can't compete with him. The new year is coming in a few days. Tang Ning and Xiru are calculating this year's accounts. Xiao Ai is not interested in these matters. Xiru is in charge of the family's financial affairs. The family's income is large and its output is not small. In addition, Tang Ning believes that money left at home is just a pile of rocks. She only keeps what she needs for daily expenses, and the rest is given to Tang Yaoyao to use to expand her property. Money makes money. He doesn't know how rich he is now. He brought the account book and flipped through a few pages. Someone from the palace came and gave him a letter. What was written in the booklet was what Chen Huang asked him to publish in the newspaper. More than 10 officials in the court were investigated for corruption. Once it was announced through the newspaper, they would never be able to get back on their feet. Judging from the number of people involved in the booklet, Emperor Chen did not intend to apply one-size-fits-all approach. After all, if he really wanted to investigate all the cases, he would probably lose half the people in the court. There is no shortage of good people in any era, and these good people generally do not lack integrity, do not bow to the knees, and do not form cliques for personal gain. This leads to the accumulation of problematic officials in the party, and one check is accurate, and the other is correct. Advertising in the Kyoto Daily News requires advertising fees, and the amount is quite high. Judging from Chen Wang's intention, he should open a section of the newspaper specifically for informing the court of these matters. From the beginning to the end, he did not regarding the offer of remuneration, it must be because he wants to have sex for free. Tang Ning even felt that even this large-scale anti-corruption operation might be due to the lack of money in the national treasury. He wanted to take this opportunity to cut a wave of leaks to replenish the national treasury, and at the same time shock some people and make them calm down. A certain palace in the palace. The imperial censor walked to the palace and said, Your Majesty, this time we investigated and dealt with 15 officials, big and small, and the property found from their homes totaled more than 1.5 million taels. Emperor Chen looked at him and asked, 15 people, 1.5 million taels. In other words, A small censor in the Yashitai has a net worth of 100,000 taels. The imperial censor said, the 700,000 taels were found from the home of Lu Shilang of the Ministry of Rights. Most of them were gifts from various officials. There was no evidence that Lu Shilang had accepted bribes and corruption. Accepting bribes is different from accepting gifts. The imperial court prohibited officials from accepting bribes, but it did not prohibit them from accepting gifts. There was no clear boundary between them. The doctor of the Ministry of Finance and a certain supervisory censor clearly deducted the money from the imperial court and accepted bribes. These two crimes were enough to convict him, but Lu Feng, the Minister of Rights, was fundamentally different from them. One was embezzling money from the court and accepting bribes, and the other was accepting some gifts on his mother's birthday. Although the gifts were a bit heavy, it didn't seem to be Lu Feng's fault. Chen Huang rubbed his eyebrows, couldn't help but look at the amount on the discount, and murmured, 700,000 taels. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 493. The 491th chapter of the main text of Ruyi Xiaolang Jun, everything goes up and down. A gift list leaked from the residence of Minister Lu of the Ministry of Rights, allowing the people of Kyoto to watch an extra free excitement before the new year. More than 10 officials were investigated, specifically involving the Ministry of Works, the Imperial College, the Sinology Temple, the Censorate, etc. The Ministry of Rights was the hardest hit. Counting the doctor of the Ministry of Rights who was imprisoned for fraud, there are only the Minister of Rights Tang Huai and the doctor of the Ministry of Shrines Lu Jin left among the 6 senior officials of the Ministry of Rights. Although the details were not published in the newspaper of Tang Grenzai, the countless undercurrents between the lines in the few short sentences could be felt even by ordinary people. Tang Ning got the news last night and arranged for the people of the propaganda department to typeset and print overnight. They had not left work until this morning. Emperor Chen dealt with many people this time. The Ministry of Rights was almost left with only Tang Huai as the commander. The doctor of the Ministry of Food and the doctor of the Ministry of Rights were imprisoned. The assistant minister Lu Feng was demoted 2 levels and demoted to another state, becoming a deputy governor of a state. It is difficult for him to come back in this life. Emperor Chen's treatment of other people was as Tang Ning expected. The 7th rank officials, whose annual salary was only 100 taels of silver, could easily take out thousands of taels as gifts. The wealthy families like the Tang family had strong capital and relatives running family businesses outside. Those officials who should have been clean officials could not explain where the money came from. Those who should have been demoted were demoted and those who should have been dismissed were dismissed. It was not surprising. But Lu Feng was the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, at least a 4th rank official. He just accepted some gifts and did not embezzle or accept bribes like others. Such a punishment was abnormal. Although Lu Feng is annoying, perhaps because he is in a high position, he is very vigilant and has no major stains. Even Su Mei didn't find out, otherwise Tang Ning would have brought it out last time. Just because he accepted a gift, Emperor Chen banished him from the capital and confiscated most of his property. Even Tang Ning felt that it was a bit heavy. In addition, Emperor Chen also promulgated a law by the way. In order to rectify the unhealthy trends in the officialdom, all court officials should not be extravagant or accept gifts in the name of birthday celebrations and weddings. If it weren't for the 700,000 taels of silver confiscated from the Lu family, Tang Ning almost believed that Emperor Chen really wanted to rectify officials and strictly investigate officials' behavior of accepting gifts. After this wave of official investigations, the court did not make any major moves. If there were no accidents, from now on, before New Year's Eve, the capital should be more peaceful. After all, the court still needs to maintain stability. If there are a few more such twists and turns, I am afraid that the system that Chen State has built up with great difficulty over decades will also collapse. Emperor Chen always did things cleanly and neatly, without dragging his feet. When one group of officials left, another group of officials would soon come up. The Minister of Rites was temporarily held concurrently by the Hanlin scholar. Lu Jin, the doctor of the Ministry of Shrines, was the only one who escaped among the four doctors. He was recognized by many people for his untainted behavior and his refusal to be involved in corruption with other corrupt officials. He took over the position of the Doctor of Rites. Although the Doctor of Rites and the Doctor of Shrines were of the same level, their status was very different. The Ministry of Rites was the head of the four departments of the Ministry of Rites. The position of the Doctor of Rites was always a preparation for the position of the Minister of Rites. In a mansion somewhere in the capital, Lu Jin, who had just been promoted to the position of Doctor of Rites, returned home. A woman came up to him and asked happily, "Master, they said you were promoted to Doctor of Rites. Is that true?" "I'm a woman." Lu Jin glanced at her and said, "I said last time that Minister Lu is doomed this time. If you get close to him, you'll die. Look at the fate of the Doctor of Food and the Doctor of Hosts. If I had listened to you, you would be a living widow now. It's all my fault, it's all my fault." The woman said apologetically, "I'm a woman. From now on, whatever the master says is what I will say. I will never say anything. Whatever the master wants to eat, I will make it for you." Lu Jin looked at her with satisfaction, enjoying the majesty of the head of the family, straightened his chest, and said, "First, 2 pork elbows. I've been busy for so many days and have lost weight." Tang family. As the year draws to a close, while other places in the capital are celebrating, the Tang family is in a state of sorrow. The officials who come to visit are all worried and haggard. These days, countless officials in the line of Prince Duan are worried and dare not let go. Some of the Minister of Rites, Lu, have been demoted and some have been imprisoned. No one knows whether they will be the next. In the court meetings of the past few days, Prince Kong has been pursuing this matter relentlessly, and is determined to take this opportunity to wipe out Prince Duan's wings. No one dares to guarantee that they can walk out safely after entering the court. King Kong is already preparing a joint impeachment. I'm afraid he will bring it up at the court tomorrow. He really wants to kill us all. It's all Minister Liu's fault. How could such an important thing be stolen by a thief? What's the use of blaming him? Who could have known that His Majesty would get so angry because of a gift list? Lord Tang, what can we do? Everyone surrounded Tang Chi and kept talking. In addition to complaining about Lu Feng, they were looking for a solution to the problem. If this matter is not resolved, they will be unable to sleep and eat. Tang Chi sent everyone away, walked out of the room, came to a wing room, looked at the middle-aged man, and asked, "Mr. Su, have you thought it through?" Mr. Su stood up and said, "He who knows the times is a hero. Since I am in the Tang family, Su has no other choice." Tang Chi's expression eased a little, and he said, "Mr. Su, you know what happened recently, right?" Mr. Su nodded and said, "I've read the newspaper." Tang Chi said, "King Kong is taking this opportunity to pursue us relentlessly and refuses to give up. If we don't do anything and let him do this, it won't be long before he can step into the East Palace. By then, it won't be a good thing for you and me. I wonder if Mr. Su has any countermeasures for this." Mr. Su shook his head and said, "It's too early." Tang Chi looked at him and asked, "What's too early?" "Lord Tang just said that King Kong will soon step into the East Palace, but it's too early." Mr. Su said, "Whether it's King Kong or Prince Duan, it's impossible for them to step into the East Palace for a long time. This time may be 1 or 2 years, or it may be 10 or 20 years, but it's definitely not now." "What do you mean?" Tang Chi frowned and said, "Mr. Su, don't beat around the bush, just tell me what we should do." "Do nothing." Mr. Su took a sip of tea and said, "Just watch King Kong do it." Tang Chi looked at him, his eyes slightly cold, and said, "Do nothing, wait for King Kong to catch us all in one fell swoop." "Mr. Su, Are you kidding? Lord Tang doesn't understand King Kong. Mr. Su looked at him and said, King Kong is a brainless person, and he is stubborn. It's okay if he doesn't do anything, but if he does, he will make mistakes. What's more, you don't have to do anything in the first place. It's not time to decide the winner between King Kong and Prince Duan. Lord Tang only sees King Kong chasing you relentlessly. Doesn't he see that His Majesty did not adopt his advice? Everything that rises to the top must decline, and everything that reaches its extreme must reverse. A person can be proud, but not too proud. Mr. Su put down his teacup and continued, Your Majesty does not want to see the dispute between Prince Kong and Prince Duan come to an end too early. Before that, no matter what you do, it will be in vain. Otherwise, after the last time the Minister of Revenue helped Prince Duan embezzle tax silver, Prince Duan would have already lost. Lord Tang has been in the court for a long time, and he doesn't know the principle of checks and balances. After listening to his words, Tang Chi was silent for a long time, his eyes flickered, and I don't know what he was thinking. He glanced at Mr. Su and said, Mr. Su's words, I will consider it. Mr. Su, rest well here these few days. If you need anything, just tell the servants to do it. He walked out of the room and soon came to another hall. Tang Hui sat on a chair, and there was a figure standing in the hall. Tang Chi walked in, looked at the young man, and asked, Are you undercover sent by Prince Kong? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 494. Chapter 492, Vicious Competition. Tang Chi has been in a high position for a long time. Standing in the hall, there is an invisible aura oppressing him. There were bruises on the young man's face. Looking at Tang Chi, his body trembled under the pressure of his momentum, and there was a trace of fear in his eyes, and he said, No, Master said that King Kong can't hold up the wall with mud. If he waits any longer, by his side, we will fall into a deep quagmire. We originally planned to leave the capital and never come back, but you caught us. Tang Chi looked at him and saw that his body was shaking, his eyes were full of fear, and he was on the verge of collapse, so he waved his hand and said, You go down first. As soon as he finished speaking, the young man couldn't wait to run out of the room. Tang Chi looked up at Tang Hui and said, The man named Su wants us to wait and see what happens. Brother, do you think we can trust him? With King Kong pressing so hard, the Tang family was naturally not unprepared at all. However, even if they wanted to resolve this desperate situation, they would have to pay a heavy price. It would be best if they could fight without losing any blood. Tang Hui thought for a moment and said, It doesn't matter if we wait a few days, just to see if he really loves us. Tang Chi nodded and said, Then I will tell them not to act rashly. Tang Mansion, at the door of a wing somewhere, the young man walked into the wing, turned around and closed the door. The moment he turned back, the fear on his face disappeared without a trace, replaced by an almost indifferent calm. He walked to the table, bowed slightly, and whispered, Mr. The middle-aged man named Su looked at him and asked, Are you okay? A small injury, nothing to worry about. The young man looked at him and asked, Sir, you are right. The Tang family will not let us leave Beijing. What should we do next? Wait, Mr. Su said calmly, when this incident passes, someone will come and tell us. Tang family, in the pavilion. Xiaoju sat across from Tang Ning with her legs crossed and said, Your father-in-law is ill at the right time. Last night, the house of the Dali Temple Shaoqing, who was responsible for supervising Lu Feng's case, was almost burned down. While walking on the road, he was almost hit by a speeding carriage. An official from Yashitai woke up and found several bloody handprints on the outer wall of his home. Those people are so bold with their naked threats. Xiao Ju shook his head and said, isn't it obvious that there is something wrong in his heart? It's not necessarily them. Tang Ning shook her head and said, this is a case that His Majesty has paid special attention to. No matter how stupid they are, they would never do this. You mean this was done by King Kong? Xiao Ju thought for a moment and nodded. It's also possible that King Kong pursued them fiercely this time and had no intention of letting them go. King Duan suffered heavy losses this time. I don't know if I can turn over. A person must know when to stop, and pushing too far will not end well. Although the former King Kong was a bit reckless, he could compete with King Duan for such a long time without a few brushes. Especially during the period when Tang Ning left the Chen Kingdom, both King Kong and King Duan had conflicts with each other. King Duan's side were all old foxes who had been hanging around in the court for who knows how long, and they had endless tricks. In this case, King Kong he didn't suffer any loss, which is enough to show that he still has some brains, but this time he couldn't see the situation clearly, which made people wonder whether his brain was eaten by a dog. Xiao Ju thought of something and suddenly looked at him and asked, do you feel that something is not right between Lu Ya and your Miss Zhong in recent days? Tang Ning came back to her senses, looked at him and asked, what happened to them? Xiao Ju touched his chin and asked, don't you think they have been spending more time together these days? When did their relationship become so good? Friendship between women is one of the most elusive things in the world. Is it any wonder that they can build a deep sisterly bond just by going shopping together? However, Xiao Ju reminded him that Xiao Ai and Lu Ya have been together for a long time. Will she be affected by her? Tang Ning does not want her to become as violent as Lu Ya. Lu Ya walked over and asked, what are you talking about? It's nothing. Xiao Ju cheered up and said, just talk about the current situation, government affairs, and so on. Lu Ya sat next to him and asked, I have a question for you. Xiao Ju was refreshed and couldn't help but straighten his body and asked, what's the problem? Lu Ya looked into his eyes and asked, who do you think is more beautiful, me or Miss Sumai Su? Xiao Ju said without hesitation, you are beautiful. Lu Ya frowned and said, you answered so quickly. It's obvious that you are perfunctory with me. No. Xiao Ju shook his head repeatedly, glanced at Tang Ning, and said, absolutely not. You are beautiful with everyone, and you are beautiful with everyone. Miss Su is the most beautiful woman in the capital. If you say she is prettier than me, you are lying to me. Lu Ya looked at him with a smile and said, if you tell the truth, I won't be angry. Xiao Ju looked at her and asked tentatively, are you really not angry? Lu Ya grasped the hem of her skirt with both hands and said with a smile, don't worry, no, I just want to hear the truth from you. To be honest. Xiao Ju thought for a while, looked at her and said, Miss Su is just a little prettier than you. Tang Ning stood up and said, I have something else to do, so I'll leave first. Although Xiao Ju has some experience now, it is obviously not enough. He was still worried that Xiao Yi was influenced by Lu Ya, but now he found that his worry was completely unnecessary. He walked to the gate of the courtyard and heard the sound of screaming and begging for mercy from the pavilion. Just as he was about to step out, a figure hurried over and said anxiously, Sir, there is a problem with our newspaper office. Please go and have a look. The location of the newspaper office is next to Tang Renzai. When Tang Ning arrived, Tang Yao Yao had already arrived. The entrance of the newspaper office, which should have been lined with a long queue, was now empty, while the surrounding bookstores were crowded with people. Tang Ning walked over, looked at Tang Yao Yao, and asked, what's going on? Tang Yao Yao's chest bulged with anger, and said, I'm so angry, they are just here to mess up. Tang Ning asked clearly and found out that these bookstores also imitated Tang Renzai and printed newspapers today. He never thought that anyone would steal his newspaper business because Tang Renzai's paper-making technology was improved, the cost was low, and the price of newspapers was also very low. From the beginning, he did not have the purpose of making a profit. In order to facilitate reading, he also quoted punctuation marks, which were not available in other places. Other bookstores, let alone making profits, must sell a newspaper for more than 10 cents if they want to keep making a profit. With Tang Grenzai's newspapers costing 1 cent, naturally no one is willing to spend that money. But he did not expect that the shopkeepers of these bookstores did not know what was wrong with their brains and actually gave away free newspapers. No matter how low the price of Tang Grenzai newspapers is, it is not as good as free ones, so the current situation has been formed. This is simply vicious competition. The street vendor folded a newspaper and put it under a table leg. After finding that it was still a little shaky, he walked over and got another one. An old man in coarse cloth walked past Tang Ning, holding a few newspapers in his hand, and said happily, "This thing is much more useful than toilet chips. I wonder if it will be delivered tomorrow." Tang Ning took a newspaper from Tang Yao Yao's hand and cast his eyes casually, only to see several headlines on it that were particularly eye-catching. Shocked. The shocking scandal of the Liu family's birthday banquet. Heartbroken. The truth behind the investigation of more than a dozen corrupt officials. The real record of the Dali Temple case. If you don't read it, you are not a Chen countryman. The paper was filled with more than 1,000 words, which were concise and to the point. It focused on the birthday banquet at the home of Liu Feng, the Minister of Rights, and exposed the corruption in the court. In addition to the more than 10 officials who had been convicted, the spearhead was directly pointed at other officials who participated in the birthday banquet, and at the end it called on the court to severely punish these criminal officials and restore a clear sky in the capital. Even Tang Ning, who had seen a lot, couldn't help but be stunned when he saw these things. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 495. For the first time since meeting King Kong, Tang Ning felt respect for him. At least he himself didn't have the courage to do the same as King Kong. Before obtaining the imperial franchise, he would personally check every sentence and every word in the newspaper and consider it again and again. Tang Yao Yao's chest was still heaving, and he gritted his teeth and said, "What they sent out is a lot of silver. I wonder how long they can deliver it?" I don't know if it was Tang Ning's illusion, but he always felt that the 18-year-old Tang Yao Yao seemed to have started to grow up again. "Where are you looking at?" As soon as this thought came to his mind, Tang Yao Yao's angry voice came over. "Ah," Tang Ning looked confused, as if he had just woken up from a trance, and said, "What are you looking at?" Tang Yao Yao saw his confused look and asked suspiciously, "What were you thinking about just now?" Tang Ning said, "I was thinking that their method can only take away our business for one day. Don't worry, the newspaper office will return to normal tomorrow." Although he didn't know what King Kong was thinking, he dared to guarantee that if these bookstores could still open tomorrow, he would let him live under Tang Yao Yao's tyranny for the rest of his life. For Tang Ning, who was determined to turn things around, this was already a heavy oath. "Tomorrow," Tang Yao Yao shook her head and said, "It's not a big loss to send them for one day. I guess they will send them for at least 1 month. I guess it's just one day." Tang Ning smiled, looked at her, and asked, "Do you dare to bet?" Tang Yao Yao didn't hesitate and asked, "How do you bet?" Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "Just like last time, if you win, you can let me do something, and if I win, I can let you do something. How about it?" Tang Yao Yao looked at Tang Ning, as if she was thinking of something bad. Tang Ning looked at her eyes and added, "Don't worry, I won't let you squeal like a pig again." With the experience of last time, in order to avoid her regretting and refusing to admit it, and for his safety, this sentence must be said in advance. Tang Yao Yao glanced at him and asked, "Do you think you've won?" Tang Ning was too lazy to explain to her, so he held out his palm and said, "High five for an oath." After high-fiving Tang Yao Yao, Tang Ning rubbed his numb palm and said, "Since we're out, why don't we go to other shops?" "Wait a minute." Tang Yao Yao stopped him, glanced at him, and asked, "Have you noticed that I'm different from before?" Tang Ning looked her up and down and found that she hadn't changed much except for some secondary growth retardation. If he told the truth, he would definitely be beaten to death. He looked at her again and said, "The clothes you wear today are pretty." Tang Yao Yao's face darkened and she said unhappily, "I wore this yesterday." She took a deep breath, straightened her chest as if unintentionally, and asked, "Apart from the clothes, are there any other changes?" Tang Ning shook her head, "No." Tang Yao Yao snorted coldly and said, "Go to the store." Tang Ning shook her head in confusion. Women are like this. They always ask men some strange questions. Perhaps the answer to this question is that she changed the rouge from a powder shop today, and the color of the pure rouge changed from light red to light red. This question obviously touched the knowledge blind spot of the majority of men. Tang Yao Yao's long legs moved so fast that they were about to disappear. Tang Ning looked up and quickened her pace to follow. The new year is approaching, and there are more lively things in the capital. There was the 16 guards competition before, and then the court suddenly broke out about punishing corrupt officials. This morning, all the major bookstores in Beijing suddenly distributed newspapers for free. Who doesn't like to take advantage of the free price? Even if you can't read, you can take it home to pad the corner of the table. The street of bookstores was full of pedestrians holding free newspapers. In half a morning, these newspapers were almost spread throughout the capital. In addition to condemning those corrupt officials, the newspapers also published the gift list that flowed out of Liu's mansion, which shocked countless people in the capital. There were countless people talking about it in major restaurants, tea houses, and roadside stalls in Beijing. These officials in the court are really rich. The gifts they give are all worth 1,000 taels of silver. 1,000 taels of silver is enough for us to spend for several lifetimes. No wonder your Majesty wants to punish these corrupt officials. The gifts they give are all the hard-earned money of the people. Hey, these corrupt officials should all be thrown into prison. At a tea stall on the street, listening to the discussion of the crowd, someone suddenly interrupted and said, "The court has only punished a dozen people, less than 20%. We should write a letter to the people and ask your Majesty to severely punish these parasites and return a bright sky to the capital." A person next to him heard the words and immediately echoed, "Yes, write a letter to the people, I am the first to agree." As soon as the voice fell, someone else intervened, "One less corrupt official means one less parasite who extorts the money of the people. Write a letter to the people, count me in." The people on the tea stall were just talking casually, but suddenly the atmosphere was brought up, and they all became indignant in an instant. "I agree to. Let your Majesty see the voice of the people. Punish corrupt officials severely." When the atmosphere at the tea stall spread to the surroundings, one of the people at the tea stall quietly left, walked to a certain street, walked up to a young man, and whispered, "Your Highness, everything is arranged." "Well done." King Kong looked at him with satisfaction and said, "Let's go, I will listen to the voices of the people of the capital for my father." He walked in front alone, followed closely by several guards from Prince Kang's mansion. This time, a series of events triggered by the gift allowed him to win the battle to make a comeback. However, the court's punishment of those officials still could not satisfy him completely. A mere 15 people were still far from his ultimate goal. Very far. He walked on the street, listening to the comments of the people, with a smile on his face, and couldn't help but say, Tang Ning, thank you very much for reminding me that newspapers can still be used in this way. Mr. Su, this time." He turned around and said something subconsciously, only to find that Mr. Su had left the capital. He couldn't help but touched his head and murmured, "Mr. Su is not around, I always feel that it seems like something is missing." In the past, when Mr. Su was here, he didn't feel anything. Now that he left, he felt empty in his head and heart, and there was always a feeling that he had lost something. He shook his head, throwing this feeling out of his mind, and took a few steps forward. Suddenly, a guard stepped forward and whispered, "Your Highness, the person in front seems to be Mr. Tang Ning Tang." King Kong raised his head and saw on the street not far ahead. A young man and woman each held a candied horse in their hands and walked leisurely on the street. Tang Ning and Tang Yao Yao were walking side by side on the street, taking a bite of candied horse, and thinking about what they would ask her for tomorrow, when a familiar voice suddenly came to their ears. "Master Tang, you are fine." Tang Ning raised her head and looked at the young man opposite her. She was stunned for a moment, then she raised her hands and said, "I have met His Highness Prince Kong. Not long after we broke up with King Kong, we met on the street, which was still a bit embarrassing." King Kong looked at Tang Yao Yao, then at the candied horse in his hand, and said, "Master Tang seems to be very leisurely." Tang Ning said, "Your Highness also seems to be quite relaxed." "I am not as free as you." King Kong glanced at him and said, "I came out today to observe the people's sentiments and listen to their opinions." Tang Ning smiled and said, "Your Highness cares about the people. I admire you. I admire you." King Kong was in a good mood, his face softened a little, and he looked at him again and said, "I not only care about the people, but also cherish talents. As long as you are willing to submit to me again, I can forget about the past." Tang Ning looked at him with complicated eyes. He couldn't hide from the prince who did this. How could he stick to him? He took a bite of the candied horse and said vaguely, "I can't understand what His Highness said or what happened in the past." Prince Kang's face completely darkened, and he said coldly, "If you don't drink a toast, you'll have to drink a fine wine. Since you don't know what's good, don't blame me for being rude. I will not give you another chance in the court tomorrow." He said coldly, then left without looking at Tang Ning. Tang Ning's pretending to be stupid made the anger in his heart begin to rise and spread. What was in his eyes just now made his anger unable to be suppressed. The meaning conveyed in his eyes just now was clearly pitiful. Does his majestic eldest son need a minister to pity him? Tomorrow, we will show him who should be pitied. King Kong snorted coldly, waved his sleeves, and was not in the mood to go shopping anymore, and said, "Go back home, fortunate young gentleman." Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 496. Chapter 494, Holding Public Opinion. Tang Ning stood on the street, bit off the last candied horse, then walked a few steps and threw the bamboo stick into the trash can on the street. In order to build a civilized new capital, littering has been banned on the streets of the capital since half a year ago. There will be a trash can at every interval. Those who litter will be fined not less than 3 cash but not more than 10 cash. Tomorrow should be the last court meeting of the year. After tomorrow, if there is no urgent matter, all major government offices will be closed until after the Lantern Festival. As a 5th grade doctor, you only need to go to court when you are called. Because Tang Ning has many identities, she is not restricted by this rule. However, he originally did not plan to go to court tomorrow, but he really wanted to see what King Kong did. Without giving him a chance, it would be really nerve-wracking to decide whether to go or not. Tang Yao Yao looked at him and asked, "Are you worried about Prince Kong?" Tang Ning shook his head. He had only recently discovered that King Kong had a trait. He could always make good things turn into bad things and bad things into worse. Based on this, he decided to go and have a look tomorrow. Seeing that Tang Ning wasn't too worried, Tang Yao Yao felt relieved. The two of them walked around the street. When they got home, Tang Yao Yao stopped him at the door and asked again, "You really don't think is there any change from before?" Tang Ning stopped, looked at her deliberately puffed up chest, thought for a moment, and said, "Your figure seems to be better than before." "Dirty." Tang Yao Yao glared at him, hid the smile on her lips, and ran into the house quickly. Tang Ning stood at the door of her house, wondering if Tang Yao Yao simply wanted to scold him. It was enough for her to be angry because she said she was not in good shape. It was not right to praise her. Women were really incomprehensible. It was better to deal with King Kong. It could be seen at first glance. His thoughts can predict his fate at the second glance. The last court meeting of the old year generally does not last very long, because a few days later, there will be the most grand court meeting. Each department summarizes the old year and looks forward to the new year. There is no 2 hours to end. Can't. Tang Ning went to court today as Zhou Xiaoyi Zhonglang general. Unless something happened, the generals of the 16th Guards would not appear in the court hall. He did not recognize any of the military attaches around him. Today's morning meeting is still focused on the year-end anti-corruption issue, and the topic revolves around the dozen or so officials. Dali Temple and the Ministry of Punishment read out the sentences of those criminals in public. The Ministry of Revenue made statistics on the silver taels seized from these people's houses and paid a total of more than 1 million taels of property to the state treasury. The Ministry of Personnel targeted these vacant positions. Made a transfer. Tang Ning could tell that Emperor Chen was not in a good mood today, and he looked at Prince Kong from time to time. The officials were all old foxes who knew how to watch people's actions. Today's morning meeting went very smoothly. No one was making excuses or arguing. The Ministry of Rights after the waiter Fang Hong retreated, no one spoke again. Wei Jian waited for a while, looked at Emperor Chen, stepped forward and said, "If you gentlemen have nothing to report, today's morning court will end here." King Kong raised his head, took a step forward, and said, "Father, I have something to report." Emperor Chen glanced at him and said calmly, "If you have anything to do, please go to the Imperial Study Room and talk about it." King Kong said quickly, "Father, this matter is of great importance. It is based on the public opinion of the people in the capital. The people have long hated certain officials in the imperial court who are not serving as corpses, so they have written a book of 10,000 people." Quit the court, Emperor Chen stood up, glanced at Prince Kong, and said, "Prince Kong, Prince Duan and Prince Huai, you three, come to the imperial study." King Kang's words were interrupted. Although he was still unwilling to do so, Huang Chen had already left and could only put away the folds in his hands. However, he glanced at King Duan and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. King Duan was frightened by what he saw. In the past few days, King Kong was obsessed with the birthday banquet of the Lu mansion and chased him fiercely. This time, he even moved out the Wanman book. After a while, in the royal study room, he was afraid that it won't be peaceful. King Huai came out, looked at the two of them, and said, "Brothers, it's better to leave quickly. Don't keep your father waiting." Tang Ning originally thought that there would be a lot of excitement in the morning today, but she found that his visit was in vain. There would be a lot of excitement in the imperial study room soon, but outsiders would not be able to see it. He sighed and walked out of the palace along the same path. At a certain moment, he saw a familiar figure in front of him. He quickened his steps slightly, walked to the person and said, "Master Lu, I haven't seen you for a long time. I haven't congratulated you on your promotion." Lu Jin, the former doctor of the Ancestral Temple Department, did not rise in rank, but in a very short period of time, he became the most senior official in the Ministry of Rights under the minister, with an unlimited future. Lu Jin looked at him, forced a smile on his face, and said, "It's all thanks to Mr. Tang." Tang Ning looked at him, "What?" Lu Jin's eyelids twitched and he immediately said, "What Xiaoguan means is that since Lord Tang came to the Ministry of Rights, Xiaoguan's luck has been very good. This time, it may be that Lord Tang brought me good luck." When he was in the Ministry of Rights, Tang Ning didn't realize that the doctor from the temple ministry was so good at talking. He originally didn't have a good impression of the officials in the Ministry of Rights, but today his impression of Lu Jin had changed slightly. This time, he did not participate in the Lu family's birthday party, nor did he send a gift. He was indeed a man who was not tainted by the mud. He waved his hand and said, "What are you talking about, Lord Lu? Lord Lu can have what he has today because of your own efforts. If Lord Lu is like Minister Lu, and does not keep himself clean, I am afraid that his fate will be the same as Minister Liu's now." Lu Jin patted his chest and said solemnly, "Don't worry, Lord Tang, I am absolutely different from Minister Lu." Lu Jin talked a lot today. Tang Ning exchanged a few pleasantries with him and said goodbye in front of the palace gate. At the same time, in the imperial study, Emperor Chen walked to the upper part, sat down, looked at King Kong, and said, "What did you want to say just now? Say it." Kong Wang immediately said, "Replying to your majesty, I received a letter from the people yesterday. I learned that the people in the capital are extremely dissatisfied with some corrupt officials in the court. Your son." Emperor Chen stood up before he finished speaking, walked in front of him, and asked, "Your Majesty, did you ask people to print those newspapers that circulated in the capital yesterday?" Kong Wang was stunned, and Emperor Chen's face was gloomy. He swallowed his saliva and said, "Your Majesty." "Letter from the people." Emperor Chen looked at him coldly and said, "You are holding the people's will hostage and disrupting the court order. Are you going to rebel?" Plop. "Your Majesty, calm down." King Kong looked at Emperor Chen, and cold sweat broke out on his forehead in an instant. He knelt on the ground with a plop. He said in a trembling voice, "Your son dare not." "Don't dare." In a rage, Emperor Chen kicked him on the shoulder and said coldly, "Holding public opinion, manipulating public opinion, forming a clique for personal gain, and attacking dissidents, what else do you dare not do?" Duan Wang looked at the scene in front of him and couldn't believe his eyes. "I thought that King Kong was pressing forward step by step, and even the Book of the People was issued. He could no longer protect the officials who supported him, and this time he would suffer heavy losses. But who would have thought that the situation was exactly the opposite of what he expected? The last time he saw his father so angry was when the case of Han Ming, the minister of the Ministry of Revenue, broke out, but that time he was replaced by the current King Kong. King Kong's sweat had soaked his clothes. He knelt on the ground, trembling all over. He could only say repeatedly, "My son is wronged, my son is wronged." At this time, he had forgotten all about attacking Prince Duan and taking revenge on Tang Ning. He could see that his father was really angry. Even at this moment, Tang Ning's eyes yesterday could not help but appear in his mind. It was not until this moment that he understood the pitiful meaning in his eyes. "Wronged?" Emperor Chen glanced at him and asked, "Everything you did is on my desk. Tell me, which one did I wrong you?" King Kong was terrified and did not dare to argue any more. He squeezed out a few tears and cried, "Father, I know I was wrong, I know I was wrong." Emperor Chen stood in the hall, calmed down for a while, looked at him coldly, and said, "Just once, if there is a next time, you can go back to your fiefdom." King Kong's body trembled, but he finally breathed a sigh of relief in his heart and bowed to thank him. He said, "Thank you, father. I won't dare to do it next time. I will definitely not dare to do it next time." Emperor Chen looked at him and said, "I will definitely investigate those who make irresponsible comments on state affairs and hold people's opinions hostage. From today on, you will reflect on your mistakes in the mansion for 3 months and are not allowed to leave the mansion within 3 months." Kong Wang felt cold in his heart. His father was so angry. This time, he was instructed by him to secretly let those bookstores print newspapers. I am afraid that none of them can be saved. But he also knew that it was good enough for him to protect himself at this moment. Losing a few people is better than driving him back to his fiefdom 10 times or 100 times. He changed his mind and immediately said, "Father, as far as I know, Tang Ning's Tang Grenzai prints newspapers every day and makes irresponsible comments on state affairs." Emperor Chen looked at him and said, "I asked him to print it? Do you have any objection?" Kong Wang was stunned. Looking at Emperor Chen's eyes, he shuddered and immediately said, "No, no." At this moment, he couldn't help but have a trace of doubt in his heart. He wondered, between Tang Ning and him, who was the prince and who was the foreign minister. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 497. Emperor Chen reprimanded King Kong, then looked at King Duan and King Huai, and said, "You two must also take this as a warning. No matter who dares to do it again in the future, I will not give you mercy." King Duan and King Huai bowed at the same time and said, "My sons and ministers, please bear this in mind." Chen Huang looked at them, waved his hand and said, "Go down." When the three of them walked out of the imperial study, King Duan looked at King Kong with a smile on his face, while King Kong looked dejected, which was exactly the opposite of the situation when the two entered the palace. King Huai bowed his hands to them and said, "Brothers, I will go back first." After saying that, he slowly walked down the steps and walked towards the outside of the palace. King Duan glanced at King Kong and said angrily, 3 months of confinement is not comfortable. Brother Wang must be prepared. You don't have to worry about it. King Kong glared back at him and strode away. Prince Duan looked at his back, snorted coldly, and walked towards Chu Hui Palace. A moment later, concubine Tang Hui looked at him in Chu Hui Palace and said, "Today, your uncle sent someone to the palace to deliver a message, telling you not to pay attention to King Kong. Before I had time to inform you, you were summoned by His Majesty. You were sent to the palace just now. Study, did your father reprimand you?" My son was about to tell my mother and concubine about this matter. King Duan looked at her and said with a smile, "My father was very angry just now, but he was not angry at my son, but at King Kong, who had just been punished by his father. 3 months of confinement. Not only that, many of his powerful people will also be in trouble this time. I have heard about Prince Kong." Concubine Tang Hui looked at him and said, "You must remember that as a prince, the most taboo thing is to incite public opinion. This is also a taboo of the emperor. If Prince Kong ended up like this, you also take this as a warning." Prince Duan said sternly, "What the mother and concubine taught me is that my sons and ministers understand." In the imperial study room, Chen Huang crumpled several newspapers into a ball and threw them on the ground, with an expression of anger and regret on his face. "None of them satisfy me, and together they are not even half as good as the others." He sat back down and seemed to have thought of something, and said, "When I first met Tang Yu, she was just a little girl was running behind concubine Hui. So many years have passed in a flash. The little girl back then actually had such a monster son. Could it be because of his father? By the way, Wei Jian, do you still remember who Tang Ning's father is?" The old slave still has some impressions. Wei Jian thought for a moment and said, "It seems that he is a talented man from Jiangnan. If there was no accident in the Tang family, he should have participated in the imperial examination. There are many talented people in Jiangnan, and that one seems to be the same. He's not very famous. He seems to be called Tang, but I can't remember." Chen Huang thought for a moment and then asked, "The Tang family did not hesitate to chase her thousands of miles to find Tang Yu back. Has he been eliminated by the Tang family?" "It seems not." Wei Jian shook his head and said, "The Tang family just brought Tang Yu back, but the man ran away with the child. I don't know where he is now. If you have a son like this, he shouldn't be mediocre." Chen Huang shook his head and sighed, "It's a pity." Tang Ning and Tang Yao Yao stood side by side at the entrance of Tang Grenzai. They saw teams of guards searching all the major bookstores opposite. From the shopkeeper to the clerks, everyone in the bookstore was shackled. They shook their heads and sighed, "Pity." Sure enough, Chen Huang would not let go of these bookstores. It was not only the storekeepers and employees of these bookstores who suffered, but also the people who instigated them behind the scenes. Manipulating public opinion has touched Chen Wang's bottom line, and Kong Wang's subordinates will inevitably be purged again. Tang Yaoyao looked at him dumbfounded and asked, "Did you do this? Open your eyes and take a look." Tang Ning looked at her helplessly and said, "That's the Yulin Guard. Do I have the ability to instruct the Yulin Guard? Aren't you also a lieutenant general?" Tang Yaoyao glanced at him and said, "You can't even command a few guards, and you still call yourself a general." Tang Ning glanced at her sideways and whispered, "You don't even have breasts, and you still say you are a woman." Tang Yaoyao raised her eyebrows. "What did you say?" Tang Ning looked at her and said, "Let me tell you, you lost this bet." Tang Yaoyao seemed very straightforward this time and said, "Tell me, what do you want me to do?" Tang Ning crossed her arms and asked, "Do you agree to everything I say?" Tang Yaoyao glanced at him and said, "I, Tang Yaoyao, am willing to admit defeat." What she meant by this was that no matter what request Tang Ning made, she would agree to it, even if it was an unreasonable request. Tang Ning looked at her, narrowed her eyes and said, "Are you sure?" Tang Yaoyao said nonchalantly, "I'm sure." Okay. Tang Ning looked at her and followed the same pattern as last time and said, "Then I want you." "Me?" Tang Yaoyao looked up at him, twitching her lips and said disdainfully, "Do you dare?" Tang Ning looked into her eyes and suddenly felt guilty. She looked away, coughed slightly, and said, "What do I want you to do? I haven't thought of it yet." "I'll tell you when I think of it." "Then wait until you think of it." Tang Yaoyao glanced at him, turned and left. Tang Ning did not catch up this time. Something was wrong with Fairy Tang today. She seemed to have some grudge against him that had been accumulated for a long time. Reason told him that at this time, for the sake of safety, he should not catch up. Let her owe this request for now, in case there is any emergency in the future, she might need it. Although he won the bet this time, he couldn't be happy at all. Even if he thought that this time it was a dog-eat-dog fight between King Kong and King Duan, and both parties suffered heavy losses, which he was happy to see, but even so, he was still a little bit dissatisfied. Even the children couldn't be happy. He returned home, poured a pot of tea, and sat in the yard in a daze. At a certain moment, he suddenly felt a chill in his nose. When he raised his head, he saw snowflakes falling. The first snow of winter in the early year of Ding Yuan finally fell 2 days before the New Year's Day. "Wow, it's snowing. Shishi, Juer, let's get up early tomorrow morning and build a big snowman." Okay, call Sister Ching too." The maids in the house seemed to like the snow very much. In fact, Tang Ning also liked the feeling when the first snow fell in winter. However, she was not very happy this time. She turned to look at the wall on the other side, stood up and walked in. Room. On the other side of the courtyard wall, Tang Yaoyao was sitting in the courtyard, frowning, breaking the bamboo sticks on the table section by section, as if she had some deep hatred for the bamboo sticks. Xiu ran out of the room in a hurry, hurriedly protected the remaining bamboo sticks, and said, "Miss, you broke my marriage sign, and I am competing with Ching to see who can do it faster." She looked carefully and found that the broken ones had no writing on them. Then she felt relieved and put all the remaining bamboo sticks into the bamboo tube and said, "Miss, these are the Yuelao spiritual sticks I made. You want to smoke one?" Tang Yaoyao shook her head and said, "I won't smoke." Xiu hugged her arm and shook it, and said, "Oh, I've been doing this for a long time. Miss, just take one. I heard that the lots drawn during the first snow are particularly effective. Don't smoke. Miss, please smoke one, just one." Tang Yaoyao was almost knocked unconscious by her, so she had no choice but to take one and said angrily, "All spiritual fortune-tellings are fake." Xiu picked up the lottery and murmured, "The princess thought it was true, and even went to the temple to fulfill her wish." I left the first lottery to the young lady. People say that sincerity will lead to success. The lady must believe it, only then can it be effective. Tang Yaoyao glanced at her and asked, what does it say on the signature? Guan Guan Juju, in his who, a graceful lady, a gentleman is very brave. She opened her mouth wide and said in surprise, Miss, this is a lucky draw. Miss got a good draw for the first time. Tang Yaoyao frowned and asked, what do you mean by Juahu? The bird in the spring wood is just what I want to pursue. The man will marry the woman, and the old man will marry. Xiu looked at her and said happily, the signature said that the lady will get married soon. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 498. What a broken sign. Before Xiu finished speaking, Tang Yaoyao flicked her on the head. Xiu covered her head, looked at Tang Yaoyao aggrievedly, and said, that's what the signature says. Tang Yaoyao waved her hand and said, go and play with Qing. Don't bother me. Let me be alone for a while. Xiu put down the lottery tube in her hand, sat opposite her, and asked, Miss, what's wrong? He made you angry again? Tang Yaoyao said, no, I lost the bet with him. How could a man as smart as him bet with Miss if he was not sure of winning? This is not the first time. Xiu looked at her and said helplessly, Miss clearly knew that she would lose, so why would she bet? Who said I knew I was going to lose? Tang Yaoyao glanced at her, stood up, and said, I went back to my room, and no matter who came to see me, they said I wasn't here. Oh, Xiu nodded, sat alone at the stone table, looked up at the falling snowflakes, and sighed leisurely. There was a movement on the wall. Tang Ning patted the snowflakes on her body, looked at Xiu and asked, is your lady here? Xiu turned to look at him and said, in the room, the lady is angry. You can calm her down yourself. Even if she lost a bet, she wouldn't be angry. Tang Ning walked towards Tang Yaoyao's room. Halfway there, she was suddenly stopped by Xiu. Tang Ning looked at her, is there anything else? Xiu handed over the lottery tube placed on the stone table and said, Master Tang, please draw a lottery. What kind of lottery? Tang Ning asked, took one, looked at the inscription on it, and read, Huan Guanjuju, in the river continent, a graceful lady, a gentleman is a good man, this is Shang Shang De Ji, aren't all your buckets full of Shang Shang? This is the content of the Yulaoling lotus. If Tang Ning remembers correctly, this should be the first lot, one of the few signed with great luck. According to the meaning of the lotus, there should be a marriage within a short period of time. A major breakthrough. Out of more than 100 lots, he immediately won the first lot, which made people wonder if Xiu was using this to deceive people. In fact, the lot in the lot was full of top lots. How is that possible? Xiu glanced at him and said, I wrote these signatures one by one. Tang Ning looked at a few more and found that the signatures were different. It seemed that he was indeed lucky. He handed the lottery tube to her again and said, does the signature mean that I will have a good marriage in the near future? Xiu looked at him and said, according to what the signature says, Mr. Tang is going to get married recently. It's okay, don't imitate other people's interpretation of signatures. Tang Ning shook her head and said, who are you getting married to? With your lady. Seeing Tang Ning turn around and walk into the room, Xiu held the lottery tube and drew one herself without believing in evil. When she saw the sentence Guan Guan Juju, she stood up in shock and said in surprise, what the hell? When Tang Ning walked into Tang Yaoyao's room, she was sitting at the table drawing a pig's head. Seeing Tang Ning come in, she crumpled the piece of paper into a ball and asked, what are you doing here? Do you have anything to do? Isn't it just that I lost a round? Tang Ning walked up to her and said, don't be angry. How about you win this round? Tang Yaoyao slapped the table and said, I'm not angry. The inkstone on the table jumped up due to her shock. Tang Ning glanced at her and asked, "You still said you're not angry." "I'm angry at myself," Tang Yao Yao lay on the table and said, "Go back and leave me alone for a while." Tang Ning turned around and walked towards the door while saying, "Okay, then I'll let you help you eat your portion of the assorted casserole. It's a pity that the fresh vegetables Xiaoju brought yesterday are so cold in the winter. It's not easy to eat, and the meat Lao Zheng bought today is so fresh." Before he reached the door, he heard an inaudible sound of swallowing. Assorted casserole was Tang Yao Yao's favorite thing to eat. After winter, because vegetables were scarce, Tang Ning rarely made it anymore. For Tang Yao Yao, who had not eaten assorted casserole for 2 months, this was an irresistible temptation. Tang Yao Yao stood up and said, "I suddenly thought of something I need to discuss with Xiao Yi. Is she at home?" "She is not here." She obviously wanted to eat but still pretended to be so arrogant. Tang Ning wanted to see how long she would continue to be arrogant. "I want to eat even if she's not here," Tang Yao Yao glared at him fiercely and strode out. When Tang Ning walked out of Tang Yao Yao's room with her hands behind her back, Xiu'er was drawing lots with several servants of the Tang family. A maid took one and said, "I won the lottery." Another maid said in surprise, "Mine is signed." A servant shook his head and said, "I drew the lottery. No wonder Kwewa ignored me these days. This lottery is really accurate. The little girl just likes to pin her marriage on these illusory things." Tang Ning shook her head and returned to her yard. She saw Tang Yao Yao and Zhong Yi standing together, looking at him with extremely unkind eyes. On the other side, Xiu held a lottery in her hand and murmured, "How could there be such a coincidence? The young lady is getting married, I am getting married, and Mr. Tang is getting married. Is this some kind of sign? Could it be?" Not knowing what she was thinking of, she lowered her head shyly, her face. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 499. After the Tang family's banquet, the guests dispersed, leaving only the 2 Tang brothers in the hall. Among the 3 Tang brothers, Tang Jing never cared about family affairs, never participated in discussions, and even rarely attended banquets on weekdays. Only Tang Huai and Tang Qi showed up in public. When the Tang family's servants came in to clean up the leftovers, Tang Qi waved his hand and said, "You go down first, and come back to clean up later." "Yes." Upon hearing this, the 2 servants immediately retreated respectfully. Tang Qi sat down opposite Tang Huai. Thinking of the thrills of the past few days, he breathed a sigh of relief and said, "I didn't expect that I could finally win over King Kong this time. Without Mr. Su, King Kong is no longer a concern." "Win?" Tang Huai raised his eyes and asked, "Did we really win?" Tang Qi looked at him and said, "Although we lost a Minister Lu, the Ministry of Rights has the eldest brother, and one more minister will not be much help. As for the rest, it's no big deal if they are gone. You know, King Kong also suffered a lot this time. We lost more than just the Minister of Rights." Tang Huai looked at him and said, "There are also your Dongta Sharan, Han Ming's Minister of Revenue, and the Ministry of Rights has been thoroughly cleaned up. We have fought with King Kong for so long, but we didn't win, and King Kong also suffered heavy losses, so who won?" Tang Qi opened his mouth and recalled what happened in the Tang family in the past 2 years. He suddenly felt speechless. In the past 2 years, the Tang family and the Kong Wang family have fought to the death. Although the power of Kong Wang has been hit, the Tang family has also suffered huge losses, which are immeasurable and irreversible. Neither Kong Wang nor Duan Wang can be said to win or lose in this war. It can only be regarded as a loss. No need to keep an eye on Kong Wang in the future. Tang Huai stood up and said, "Let Mr. Su return to Kong Wang's mansion. His role there is much greater than here. The most trusted counselor is someone else's undercover. Kong Wang has no choice but to go to destruction." Tang Qi looked at Tang Huai again and asked, "Can Su be completely trusted? Although this person is very smart, I always feel that it is difficult to control him. He seems to have some other secrets. It is normal for such a person to be arrogant. Tang Hui looked out the window and said, as for whether he can be trusted, he has to prove it himself. He paused and said, compared to Kongwang, the capital has another trouble, which is getting bigger and bigger. Tang Qi and Tang Hui have the same feeling about this trouble. Originally, he was just an ant that the Tang family could easily kill, but because of their repeated negligence, he became increasingly powerful. Now, he has established a firm foothold in the capital and has become a giant that no one can ignore. There are 2 Tang families in the capital, which is a great irony and shame for them. Like a thorn in the throat. It is another New Year's Day, and this year's family is more lively than in previous years. Tang Ning hopes that this liveliness can continue every year, and it will be more prosperous year by year. There are too many happy events in the family this year. In addition to the rising official positions of him and his father-in-law, there are 2 more mistresses in the family, which can only be temporarily not announced. The agreement with Lanlin is still 2.5 years away, that is, from now on, at most 2 years later, their family will be reunited. This year's New Year's Eve dinner is not perfect, mainly because Zhao Man was recalled to the palace. There are also many rituals and festivals in the royal family before and after the New Year's Day, and she will not be able to leave the palace for a few days. Su Mei came with her mother like last year. After midnight, Tang Shui also quietly slipped out of the house. Perhaps because she was picked up by her mother, Tang Ning always felt that she was not so close to the Tang family. Zhonglang Jiang was already a senior general of the 16 guards. After becoming Zhonglang Jiang of the Left Guard, he had no reason not to attend the Grand Court meeting. The Grand Court meeting was boring. It took nearly an hour for officials from all over the country to report on their work. During this process, except for a few senior officials in the court who were of status and were older, everyone else had to stand throughout the whole process. This was just a piece of cake for Tang Ning, but most of the officials in the court limped when they walked out after the court was dismissed. The days after that returned to being boring. The women in the family either went to the temple fair or went shopping, and even took Xiao Xiao with them. Tang Ning had nothing to do and prepared to go to the Xiao mansion to pay New Year's greetings. He had no involvement with others in the capital, except for the Xiao mansion. Not to mention his relationship with Xiao Ju, just considering Mr. Xiao's identity as the general of the Left Guard, he had to go on this trip. Tang Ning walked into the hall and bowed, saying, "I see General Xiao." General Xiao waved his hand and said, "There is no General Xiao here." Tang Ning was stunned for a moment, then bowed again and said, "Junior greets General Xiao." "You are here, why bring any gifts?" Old Master Xiao waved to the servant beside him and said, "Put them all away. In my lifetime, you are the youngest lieutenant general I have ever seen." Old Master Xiao looked at him and said, "When the kid from the Ling family was lieutenant general of the Left Feather Guard, he was 2 years older than you." Tang Ning bowed and said, "It's all because of your Majesty's favor. The 16th Guard has indeed been a bit out of line in recent years." Old Master Xiao took a sip of tea and said, "Since your Majesty has handed over the Left Guard to you, you should do a good job. It's best if you can do something good and show us old guys." As soon as Old Master Xiao finished speaking, Xiao Ju walked in from the door, looked at Tang Ning, and asked in surprise, "Why are you in my house?" Mr. Xiao looked at him and said, "You young people have something to talk about. You can entertain your own friends while I go out for a walk." After Mr. Xiao left, Xiao Ju looked at Tang Ning and asked, "Have you heard that King Kong was grounded by His Majesty for 3 months? I heard that he was not summoned to the palace on New Year's Eve. Several of his dignitaries also all were deprived of their titles." Tang Ning nodded and said, "I heard about it. King Kong was really a model of seeking death this time. The good cards he held in his hand were smashed into pieces, and they hit Chen Wang's gun. The lesson he learned this time should be enough for him to learn wisely." If you think about it carefully, Prince Kong is quite pitiful, Xiao Ju said, then shook his head and said, let's not talk about it anymore. The envoy from Xi'an came to Beijing this time and brought many beauties from Xi'an with him. Many powerful people have brought them back to their homes. They can be used as concubines or servant girls. They are very pleasing to the eye. Aren't you interested? Tang Ning shook her head and said, no. He already has radish, cabbage, chess, calligraphy, and painting at home, so there is no need to buy another cantaloupe. Although he really wants to eat cantaloupe, for the sake of family harmony, it is better not to think about it. The incident caused by the sudden appearance of two ladies last time was enough for him. If he bought another beauty from the western regions, Tang Yaoyao would not let him go, even if Xiao Ru Xiao didn't mind. As a nominal neighbor, she actually exercises the power of a big woman. What's more, if you want to see exotic customs, it's enough to visit Tang Shui, why bother looking far away? He looked at Xiao Ju and asked, did you buy it? I don't dare. Xiao Ju shook his head and said, but I heard that Tang Jing bought one. This boy is about the same age as us and is not married yet. I don't know what he is thinking. Could it be that he likes this tune? He thought for a moment, seemed to have discovered something, and said in shock, Tang Shui looks like a girl from the western regions. Do you think Tang Jing would like Tang Shui? It shouldn't be possible. Tang Shui is still his sister no matter what. He doesn't. Maybe he is that beastly, but not necessarily. What if he is really that beastly? Tang Ning glanced behind him and asked casually, do you not want to buy it or don't you dare to buy it? Xiao Ju shook his head and said, I would like to buy it, but it is too expensive. If I buy it, wouldn't it expose the fact that I hide the banknotes secretly? What to buy? A voice came from behind him. The beauty of the western region. Xiao Ju realized something was wrong after answering. He turned around and looked at Lu Ya walking over, his expression changed drastically. So you like beauties from the western regions? I also hid the banknotes secretly. Take care. Looking at Lu Ya approaching step by step, Tang Ning patted Xiao Ju's shoulder and turned to leave. Tang Mansion. Tang Chi sat on the chair, looked at Mr. Su, and said, after a while, I will wrong Mr. Su again. Mr. Su waved his hand and said, for His Highness's great cause, this is not a grievance. Mr. Tang does not have to worry about Prince Kong. He picked up the teacup and found that there was no tea in it, so he put it down again. Immediately behind him, a maid stepped forward to help him fill up the teacup. In the process, she accidentally knocked over the teacup. The hot tea spilled onto Mr. Su's clothes, and he immediately stood up. Tang Chi's face darkened and he said coldly, how do you do this? The maid opened her mouth in a panic, but she spoke a strange language. Her facial features were also very distinct, her nose was high, and she was very exotic. She was obviously not a Han woman. Mr. Su smiled and said, don't be angry, Mr. Tang, she didn't mean it. While he was speaking, his eyes were fixed on the maid from the western region and did not move away. Tang Chi has been in power for many years and is very good at observing people's emotions. When he saw this scene, he looked at Mr. Su and said with a smile, if Mr. Su likes it, I will give this beauty from the western region to you. How about it? Mr. Su looked at him and smiled sheepishly, but did not refuse and said, thank you, Mr. Tang. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 500. Tang Chi looked at the maid from the western region and said word by word, from today on, you will be with Mr. Su. The maid was panic-stricken, with a look of confusion on her face. She obviously didn't understand Chinese. Tang Chi pointed at her, then at Mr. Su, and after a while, the maid seemed to understand something. She spoke a sentence in Western dialect and stood respectfully behind Mr. Su. He glanced at the maid from the Western region with satisfaction, looked at Mr. Su, and said, "I will not disturb Mr. Su's elegance." After that, he walked out with his hands behind his back. Tang Chi walked out of the courtyard, and the next moment, the young man next to Mr. Su walked out of the room and closed the courtyard door. In the room, after Tang Chi left, the panic on the face of the maid from the western regions was gone. She looked at Mr. Su, gave a slight salute, and said in extremely standard Chinese, "Thank you for your hard work, sir." Mr. Su was not surprised. He sat at the table, poured 2 cups of tea, and asked, "Who is the envoy coming this time?" The maid said, "It's Mr. Liu." "He's here too." Mr. Su finally showed a look of surprise on his face and asked, "Does the king have any important instructions?" The maid nodded and said, "The king said that Mr. Su doesn't need to do that matter." "Why?" Mr. Su frowned for a moment and said, "It took a lot of effort for us to get to where we are today. If you give me another year, we can complete the task, so why don't we have to do it again?" The maid waited patiently for him to finish, then slowly said, "Someone will do this for us. The Lord asked you not to interfere anymore." Mr. Su calmed down for a while and then said, "I understand. Does the Lord have any other instructions?" The maid looked at him and said slowly, "Yes." The maid from the western region lowered her voice and spoke slowly. Mr. Su seemed to have learned something unexpected, and her expression changed from indifferent to surprised, and then turned to shock. Tang Mansion, elsewhere, Tang Jing walked into the room, looked at Tang Chi and said, "Second uncle, you gave away that beauty from the western regions." Tang Chi looked at him and said, "It's just a maid, just buy another one. There are some people that cannot be bought with money. You will be the head of my Tang family in the future, so you should know these things clearly in your mind." Even though Tang Jing was dissatisfied, he could only nod in agreement. Maidmen are easy to buy, but beauties from the western regions are hard to come by. This time, the western region's envoy brought out very few, and the one he bought was the best among the best. She was almost snatched away by Ling Feng, but that the beauty chose him. Although he often went to brothels, beauties like these from the western regions could not be encountered in brothels. Unexpectedly, he had just bought it half a day ago, and before he could do anything urgently, his second uncle took it away and gave it away. He was extremely unhappy. "I know what you are thinking." Tang Chi looked at him and said, "You are not young, and it is time to start a family. I have discussed this matter with your father and mother-in-law, and we will wait for some time. When the time is right, I will mention it to your majesty." Tang Jing was startled when he heard this and asked, "What are you talking about? I know you have always liked Princess Pingyang." Tang Chi looked at him and said, "Princess Pingyang has already reached the age of marriage. No one could stop the marriage. Now that the marriage has failed, if the Empress speaks in person, your majesty shouldn't refuse." Tang Chi looked at Tang Jing's stunned look and asked, "What, you don't want to?" Tang Jing came back to his senses, a strange smile appeared on his face, and nodded, "Yes." Xiao Ju's private money was confiscated, and he gave up his desire to buy a beauty from the western regions. Fortunately, Lu Ya did not do anything to him. There is a saying in the capital that children are not spanked on the first day of the new year. Although today is not the first day of the new year, but before the 15th it's the New Year's Day, so it's not very auspicious to do it during the New Year's Day. Xiao Ju sat opposite Tang Ning and looked at Tang Ning with resentful eyes and a hint of confusion. Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Do you regret it?" A bit. Xiao Ju nodded and asked, "Will I be like this in the future?" Tang Ning shook her head and said, "If you can beat her, the situation can be reversed. Practice your martial arts well and fight like a man. Among the generals, dignity and status are achieved with fists. Who made him like Lu Ya and not someone else? If he liked Princess Anyang, Wouldn't these things happen? Compared with Lu Ya, I think Miss Tang is simply too gentle. Xiao Ju looked at him with an annoyed face and said, why do you meet such a good girl? This is fate. Tang Ning looked at him and said regretfully, as the saying goes, there is a time in life that must come, but there is a time in life, don't force it, this is fate. If you can't resist, then close your eyes and enjoy it. Where did the saying come from? Xiao Ju glanced at him and said, there is a time in life, but there is no time in life, so don't force it. I only know that my master told me that my destiny is up to me and I can't help it. Sky. Tang Ning asked in surprise, when did you get a master? When I was a child, Xiao Ju said, in order to cure my illness, my father asked me to become my master from a Taoist priest. He stayed at my house for a few months and then went out to travel. I also learned fortune telling from him. Xiang, do you want me to take a look at it for you? No need. Tang Ning waved her hand, believing that Xiao Ju could read fortune tellers. It would be better to believe in Xiu'er's marriage lottery. The probability that Xiao Ju could read fortune tellers was lower than the chance that he would get married again this year. Let's take a look, see if there is no missing piece of meat. Xiao Ju stared at his face carefully, and after a moment, he said in surprise, I see your face is red, your brows are springy, it's like peach blossoms, within a month, you will have good luck. You are so beautiful and full of peach blossoms. Tang Ning stood up, not wanting to listen to Xiao Ju's nonsense anymore, and said, let's go. I'll go to the Zioki camp on the 16th of the first lunar month. See you then. Tang Ning turned around and walked a few steps when she saw a person limping over in front of her. Xiao Ju stepped forward and said, Brother Han, you are here. The middle-aged man with a kind face looked at him and asked with a smile, is the old general here? Xiao Ju said, my dad should be in the back garden now. Brother Han, please go directly there. My dad was still talking about you yesterday, saying why you didn't come this year. The middle-aged man said, the old problem happened again a few days ago. This injured leg hurts terribly. I feel better today, so I came here in a hurry. After he said something, he suddenly looked at Tang Ning and asked, is this Mr. Tang? I met him from a distance a few days ago during the court meeting. Mr. Tang is really a young talent. He is already a lieutenant general at a young age. When I was your age, I wasn't even a captain. The middle-aged man sighed with emotion and limped away. Tang Ning looked at Xiao Ju and asked, who is this? He is Marquis Wu Lai. Xiao Ju explained, he used to serve under my father and made many military exploits. Later, he injured his leg and could no longer fight. Your Majesty made him a marquis and allowed him to stay in the capital. Since the founding of the People's Republic of China, the imperial court has rarely granted titles to marquises. Tang Ning has yet to get even the smallest title. In the 2 years he has been in the capital, he has only seen Emperor Chen reduce titles, but has never seen him be granted titles. This shows how difficult it is. For this Wu Lihao to be a special case, his military achievements must have been considerable. Xiao Ju looked at Wu Lihao's limping back and said with some admiration, back then, one of Sushan's troops invaded our border and slaughtered all the people in the village. Brother Han led his troops 300 miles deep into the grassland and cut the grassland with his own hands. He beheaded the tribal leader and captured all of them. This is how he got his title. Over the years, he is one of the few former tribesmen who are willing to come to the Xiao family to visit my father. The Xiao family began to decline very early, so they could still come to visit Mr. Xiao's old team every year, which was considered a sign of friendship. He sighed, walked outside the Xiao mansion, looked at Xiao Ju, and asked, why are you following me? Xiao Ju said matter-of-factly, I'll follow you back to your home. Tang Ning asked, why did you go to my house? Xiao Ju looked back at Xiao mansion and said, you were here just now, so she didn't do anything to save me face. Now that you are gone, leave me alone to go back. Aren't you looking for death? I will go back after she leaves at night. Tang Ning explained, but I'm not going home, I'm going to Tianashanju. Xiao Ju said, you are looking for your Miss Su, I will be right next to you and I will never disturb you. Tang Ning looked at him and asked, when you and Lu Yaya went up to the willow branches and hugged each other after dusk, I stood by and watched. Do you think this is appropriate? Hug each other, make love to each other. Xiao Ju looked at him and said in surprise, is this what you usually do? No. Tang Ning shook her head and said, we usually sleep together. Sleeping with the most beautiful woman in the capital, Xiao Ju glanced at him disdainfully and said, do you think I will believe it? Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 501. Tang Ning glanced at Xiao Ju and said, believe it or not. Do you think I'm still the same person as before? Xiao Ju said disdainfully, if you really slept together, Miss Su would have moved into your Tang family long ago. Besides, how could a woman like Miss Su be so easy to get? It has to be admitted that Xiao Ju's IQ has increased sharply since he got together with Lu Yat. Su Mei is indeed not an ordinary woman. Tang Ning has never been able to guess her thoughts. She is a woman with a story. She is not a simple girl like Tang Yao Yao, who has everything written on her face. Let's go. Xiao Ju glanced at him and said, it was because of you that she discovered my private money just now. You must solve the problem you caused. Xiao Ju's IQ has really improved. It seems that he must be taken with him. Tang Ning waved her hand and said, follow me if you want. Xiao Ju took 2 steps and suddenly looked at him again and asked, I didn't provoke you or provoke you just now. I just said that Tang Jing might like Tang Shui. Why did you trick me? Is it not Tang Jing who has improper thoughts about Tang Shui, but you? Tang Ning glanced at him and asked, is this all you have in your mind all day long? Xiao Ju's mind needed a bag of detergent powder to clean it. Tang Ning was too lazy to talk to him along the way. She sent him to drink and came to Su Mei's yard alone. There was no one in the room. Only Xiao Tao was playing a game of stacking blocks with mahjong. The table and bed were a mess and she didn't know how to clean them up. She was the most incompetent maid Tang Ning had ever seen. Tang Ning stood at the door and asked, is your young lady here? Xiao Tao raised her head and said lazily, the young lady is busy. Tang Ning asked, when will she be done? I don't know. Xiao Tao shook her head, suddenly looked at him, and said, you and the young lady are idle anyway, why don't we play cards? Playing cards with Xiao Tao was a complete crush. After an hour, Tang Ning only had 2 pieces of paper on her face, and her forehead was already covered with them. No more playing, no more playing. After more than half an hour of losing and no winning, she angrily tore off all the paper on her face and said, no more playing. Tang Ning looked at the sky, stood up, stretched, and said, I'm leaving too. Since Su Mei was busy, he would come another day. If he stayed any longer, it would be dark. Just as he walked to the door, Su Mei pushed it open and walked in. She looked a little tired. When she saw him, she showed a bit of spirit and said, why are you here? Tang Ning looked at her and asked, how long have you not rested? Only 2 days. Su Mei waved her hand and said, I've been busy these days. It will be fine in 2 days. This year is not peaceful. From the capital to Chengchu, the grassland, and the western regions, the situation is. Tang Ning helped her to the bed and said, go to bed first. If there is anything, we will talk about it tomorrow. Sometimes he couldn't understand Su Mei. A small restaurant owner was worried about the emperor of a country. What did the situation in the grassland and the western region have to do with them? Could it be that the old woman really wanted to subvert the imperial power as he thought? And Gong Sunying had already entered the side of Emperor Chen. The identities of these 2 people were unknown for the time being. It is very likely that they have something to do with the fallen Liang state. After all, the poison technique was only available in Liang State. But these were just his guesses. Sumei didn't tell him the inside story. Tang Ning looked at Sumei lying on the bed, eyes closed, breathing steadily, and sighed softly. Women, have a name called mystery. After Sumei fell asleep, Tang Ning sat by the bed for a while before leaving quietly. Xiao Tao came over with some food, and Tang Ning called her and said, "Let her sleep for a while. What she needs now is rest. If she wakes up, it will be difficult for her to fall asleep again." He walked out of the yard and closed the door gently. Suddenly, a noisy sound came to his ears. "Let me go, I want to see Miss Su." "Sir, Miss Su is not here, please come back another day." "Let go, who are you to stop me?" Tang Ning looked in the direction of the voice and saw several Tianronju employees hugging a young man in luxurious clothes. The young man was drunk and pushed the employees away while shouting that he wanted to see Miss Su. Tang Ning walked over and asked, "What's going on?" The manager of Tianronju knew him and hurriedly said, "This guy is shouting that he wants to see Miss Su, and we can't stop him." Sumei had just fallen asleep. With her sleep quality, she would be awakened by the slightest sound. Tang Ning walked up to the young man and slashed his neck with a knife. The world immediately became quiet. The steward looked at him and said in surprise, "Mr. Tang, he is." Tang Ning looked at the young man lying on the ground and said, "No matter who he is, send him back home. Miss Su is very busy now and will not see anyone." "What's wrong?" Xiao Ju came over and looked at Tang Ning and asked, "What's going on?" Tang Ning looked at the young man lying on the ground and said, "There is a drunk and troublemaker. I asked him to be quiet." Xiao Ju glanced at the ground and said in surprise, "Why is it him?" Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Do you know him?" For the children of the major wealthy families in the capital, no matter who they are, Tang Ning no longer needs to give them face. If it were their fathers, it would be almost the same. Xiao Ju shook his head and said, "He is Brother Han's son." Wu Lai Ho. Tang Ning looked at Xiao Ju, and the middle-aged man he met in Xiao's mansion today came to his mind. He could not associate this drunk and domineering young man with the Wu Lai Ho in the daytime. Xiao Ju sighed and said, "Send him back first, we will talk while walking." He called a few Tianronju staff, and together with Tang Ning, they sent the young man to Wu Lai Ho's mansion. After leaving Tianronju, Xiao Ju explained, Brother Han had been at the border for many years. During this period, his wife and son were in his hometown. Later, his wife died of illness and his son also fled to another place. After returning to Beijing, Brother Han made many inquiries and finally found him. He always felt that he owed them all these years. Under his indulgence, he became what he is now. A loving mother often spoils her son, and so do loving fathers. Even a strong man on the battlefield often loses his composure when facing these things. The Ling family is so prominent, but it also produced a prodigal son like Ling Feng. Master Xiao has made great military achievements and is extremely majestic, but he is also giving birth to Xiao Ju, who has a head full of pornographic things. The two had just entered Wu Lihao's mansion when Wu Lihao, who had received the news, limped out, looked at Xiao Ju and Tang Ning, and said anxiously, "Is this kid causing trouble outside again?" Xiao Ju waved his hand and said, "Brother Han, don't worry. He was just drunk and crazy. We saw him and brought him back." Wu Lihao was relieved immediately and stretched out his hand and said, "Come in and sit down, come in and sit down. This kid has always made me worry." After the host and the guests sat down, Wu Lihao looked at them and said, "Thank you, Brother Xiao and General Tang." "Brother Han, you're welcome," Xiao Ju replied, then looked at him and said, "But Brother Han should really take good care of him. These days, I've heard a lot about the ridiculous things he did outside. What if he gets into trouble one day and Brother Han can't protect him?" I know, Wu Lihao nodded, and when he looked at Tang Ning, he suddenly said, I have an unwelcome request, I hope Lord Tang can agree. Tang Ning looked at him and said, Marquis Wu Lai, just say it. Wu Lihao looked at him and said, I, a useless person, have no way out. Han Chong is still young, I want to put him on the left. Let him be trained in the guards to change his temper. What do you think, General Tang? It's just a small matter. This was just a matter of words for Tang Ning. He looked at Wu Lihao and said, Your Majesty, send him here anytime you want. Wu Lihao stood up and said, Thank you, General Tang. Tang Ning smiled and said, It's just a piece of cake. Tang Ning could understand Wu Lihao's approach. Compared with the Xiao family, Wu Lihao mansion was truly in decline. The title earned through military merit could not be passed on, but it could only give their children a higher starting point. If the son was not a good person, the wealth of Wu Lihao mansion would end here. How pitiful are the parents in the world. As he walked out of Wu Lihao mansion, Xiao Ju sighed for the first time and said, Brother Han saved my father's life. When the time comes, you hand Han Chong over to me. I will definitely cure his dandy problems. Tang Ning glanced at him. A dandy who went to a brothel and asked 10 girls to feed mosquitoes had the nerve to call others dandy. Compared with his increased IQ, his shamelessness was also increasing day by day.